Hello.
I should preface this conversation by mentioning to everybody that Kerry is very under the weather, and she's performing tonight on Broadway, so we're very lucky that she rallied and joined us here. Thank you, Kerry.
I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Before you knew her as Olivia Pope on Scandal, and before she masterfully portrayed Professor Anita Hill in the movie Confirmation, and before her many roles in TV and film, Kerry Washington was a theater kid. So you're back on Broadway in American Son. We saw you last on stage in David Mamet's Race in 2009. What drew you back to the stage?
This time around, I have to say what drew me was the particular play that I'm doing. It's a new play called American Son. It's written by Christopher Demos Brown, who has become one of my personal heroes. He's somebody who was a quote-unquote struggling writer for a long time, and he continued to build his career in other ways, went to law school, became a lawyer, is now a partner at a law firm, and he, on the side, kept his creativity going and kept writing, and he had this little play, American Son, that got some attention and started being performed in regional theaters and started winning awards for playwriting, and now he's having his Broadway debut. So he flies up from his law firm in Florida to come work with us for a week and then goes back down to his lawyering. And the play comes out of some of his experiences as a prosecutor, and you can tell that there's a legal mind who's woven all of these themes together in the play. But I think he's an exceptional example of somebody who has sort of committed to the role of creativity in his life as he's pursued his other endeavors.
It's such hard work and takes a toll, although you can't tell. Kerry looks fabulous and sounds fabulous. But it's hard work. What is the lure of stage performance and perhaps that connection with the audience that keeps an artist coming back to Broadway? Yeah,
you know, it's funny. There's been a lot of talk about how Scandal revolutionized the idea of live tweeting, you know, at a time when television was worried about the lack of immediate viewership. You know, people weren't tuning in for TV shows in real time because of the advent of DVR, and so our live tweeting required viewers to watch in real time, otherwise you'd have spoilers. And we were the first show to do it in the way that we did it, and I think one of the reasons why the cast was so committed to a culture of live tweeting is because so many of us came from the theater. And so we were accustomed to doing a performance and having a communal relationship with audiences where we put work out and we could feel the audience's response. Live tweeting was the closest way to recreate that over technology, right? We are mediated by screens in film and television, but because of live tweeting, something would happen on the show and we could feel the wave of emotional response from the like, wow, oh shit, oh my gosh. Like, you got all of that through social media. And so it really allowed us to be in community with our audiences, and they felt like they were part of our world, we felt like we were part of their world. And I think that is the magic of theater, is that for me, there is something truly, truly profound, and that's not an overstatement. There is really something profound about the ritual of sitting in a room, in a dark room, and sharing air and time to go on an emotional journey together. You know, time is our greatest commodity. And when you say to somebody, I want you to put your life on hold for 90 minutes, or someplace 4 hours, but ours is 90 minutes, for 90 minutes, and come and make this world your reality just for the next 90 minutes, there's a real magic to that we all go on this journey as if it's the first time, because it's their first time. And I consider it sacred. So I'm really grateful to be back on Broadway and be in that kind of community with audiences again, particularly with a story like this, because I think the story we're telling in American Son is a very, very important story to be told and conversation to be had.
Because it's so physically and emotionally grueling, do you have a pre-performance ritual? Are there things that you do either out of superstition or just because you need the energy and the strength to do this eight times a week.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you gear up.
I would say doing theater is the most athletic thing you can do as an actor, because your audience, you know, when you do film and television, your audience is here. It's where the camera is, and you really only have to convey that truth to that camera. But in the theater, you have to convey the truth to all 1,000 people in every seat, and you need to make sure everybody can hear you and feel you, not just hear the words, but feel. So it is a very athletic experience, and I try to treat myself like an athlete during this time. I mean, in the way that I eat, in the way that I exercise, in the way that I sleep. You know, I do preventative work with doctors a couple times a week, acupuncture. I mean, I just really try to stay on top. And even when I'm doing that, it doesn't always work, obviously. But it's you know, in the play we're doing now, I'll just briefly say the play is about, it's 90 minutes in real time in the lobby of a police precinct. It's a black mom and a white dad who've been recently separated, and they are desperately looking for their 18-year-old son who has just had some kind of altercation with the cops. So it's 90 minutes of us in that police precinct trying to figure out where he is and what's going on. So it is really like 90 minutes of fight or flight for me on my body, you know, just like you feel like I feel like I'm dropped into a nightmare 8 times a week, and I have to be willing for my body to not know the difference. And so that's the part that's really stressful, is that I'm lying to my body. I'm saying to my body, this is the reality. And so I notice, you know, when I walk off stage that my heart is beating very fast, that I will sometimes have stress headaches. Like it reminds me of when we were doing Scandal and I was pregnant, and we would do these huge, emotional, awful scenes where, like, I remember in particular, my father had been stabbed. It's Scandal, right? So my father had been stabbed, and he was lying on the floor of our office in a pool of blood, and I'm rocking over him and weeping and screaming, and we'd say cut, and all the girls in the cast and myself, we'd all look at my belly and go, we're just kidding. It's just pretend. It's just pretend, because the body doesn't know the difference. The body can't tell. So I would try to sort of say, it's okay, we're not really in panic, everybody's fine.
So how do you decompress after a performance? Because you do have children you have to go home to, you have other obligations. How do you turn off after a performance so that you can go about your daily life and trick your body into normalcy again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, I think a lot of us in the world right now are thinking about self-care in different kinds of ways, because I think we're living in such stressful times. And so I just try to pick up those tools: journaling, acupuncture, a bath. And sometimes it is just like snuggling with my littles and my husband, and, like, you know, just walking myself back. It's funny, my happiest time of the day is right when the show is over, because it's like, oh, I don't have to do that for like another 22 hours. So I do
Unless
like
you have
to
a matinee and an evening performance.
Yes, exactly. But I do like to greet people after the play and help them process it, because it's a very intense journey.
Right. At Fast Company, we're obsessed with productivity, and
As you should be.
Yes. And I read in the recent Marie Claire cover story that featured Kerry that you recently reread 7 Habits of Highly Productive People.
I was like, oh, that's out there now. My nerd flag is flying high.
What are some of your favorite tips for getting it all done?
I just love learning about productivity, because there's so much that I want to do, and there's so much on my plate as a producer and a director and an actor and a mom and a wife and an activist, and I want to try to bring the best version of myself and also survive. So I was talking in the article about one tool in that book that I really love, which is really about, you know, it's a way of beginning with the end in mind, which is to reflect on your own funeral and to think about your own obituary and your eulogy and what would you want people to say. He actually says to pick a person from 4 different areas of your life, like someone in your family, someone who you work with, somebody from a community involvement. I don't remember. Does anybody know what the other one is? But he says to pick different people and to write out what their eulogy of you would be, what you would want it to be. And for me, that exercise is so important because it helps me think about not just what's on your plate today, like what are the fires to put out today, but the long game, and what are my bigger values that I want to be operating out of, so that I'm not just always in response, but that my proactivity comes out of alignment with my own values and culture, the culture that I'm building in my company, as opposed to responding to the world around me.
You mentioned your work as a producer, and one of the new projects that you're producing is 5 Points for Facebook Watch.
Yeah.
Was that a concept that was specifically developed for that platform, or did that project come to you and you said, let's experiment with Facebook Watch?
No, it came for that platform because it's short form, so it's 10-minute episodes, 10-minute episodes, and why we really gravitated towards the project is I feel like one of the goals at my company, Simpson Street, is to really embrace the idea that the protagonists of our stories shouldn't just look like one kind of person, that everyone is the lead of the story of their life, and our stories should reflect that. And so in 5 Points, actually, it's one kind of tragic crisis event happens in a school, and each episode unravels the event from a different character's perspective. So you have multiple leads and multiple perspectives, and I think it's very much a lesson in empathy as much as anything else.
There are a lot of media companies now experimenting with that very short form.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman have announced a company that is specifically looking at that form. Yeah, what is your, as an artist and as a producer, what are the unique opportunities of that really short format, and what are the challenges? When are the times where you're like, God, I wish I just had another 3 minutes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the great asset to short form is you don't lose people's attention. I think our attention spans are narrowing and narrowing. I mean, we talked a lot 10 years ago about the MTV generation, right? But it's like, it's getting even shorter and shorter, our ability to commit to content. And I think, particularly with so many avenues for storytelling today, one of the ways to compete is to say, well, we're not going to take a whole hour of your day. We're only going to take 10 minutes, and we're still going to promise you interesting, captivating content that will make you feel and make you think. It is hard to do in that amount of time. Being able to do it over a course of 10 episodes is easier. But I think for me, it's the exciting new challenge of being able to make content that speaks to different audiences and that fits into people's lives. And it's, in a way, it's sort of, again, the conversation about productivity, right? It's like, what is the level of efficiency with which you can tell your story?
Right, right. Does that format allow you to take risks that you might not take if you were producing a traditional 22-minute or hour-long drama for a more conventional streaming service, or even HBO or ABC?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do anything today in short form content, and you're not restricted by advertisers, not in the traditional sense. So it does allow for us to take different kinds of risks, for sure. There's still oversight depending on who you're working with, but that's part of, at our company, we have 2 projects at Hulu, a project at Facebook, we have a film at Universal, a film at Fox. We have a lot of productions in various stages of development and production, and it's fun to match the story and the culture and how it's being delivered with the partner, whether that partner is a traditional company like ABC, we're working on 2 comedies with ABC this year, or somebody like Facebook, or it's really interesting to figure out how to mold your content for different buyers. Right.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit. The theme of this conference is "The Future is Creative."
Yeah.
And
amen.
and it really comes out of a realization that as automation absorbs more and more of the mundane work in fields from the legal profession to even, you know, film and television, that there's going to be a premium, and that, you know, the worker of the future really needs to be more creative, whether they're a coder, an engineer, or an actress. Does this ring true in your experiences as a director, producer, and artist?
Yeah, I mean, on the opposite end of the spectrum from where I am, you know, on the development side, I was recently at a movie theater in Boston. I was directing an episode of Smilf, and I took my family to the movies on the weekend. There was not a single person selling tickets at the theater. No one. It was all automated. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And I know that that's the direction that everything is going. And I think, I mean, you and I were talking backstage, there's this adorable little intro opening that Pixar has before its films with this bouncing lamp that bounces around. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The first time I saw that, it scared the shit out of me. Because there was a moment where that lamp has a feeling. And I thought, I'm screwed. Like, if lamps can have feelings, and that's the most human of human endeavors, I'm gonna be out of a job really soon. So I do think that, again, it's probably what drove me to the theater as well, is this kind of trying to return to the purity of what it means to be human beings and share spaces in the way that to me, the tradition of storytelling began. You know, we began telling stories gathered around a campfire, and I think this is kind of the closest thing. The light isn't fire, it's these very bright things, but we're all gathered here to share a communal experience. Anyway, I went off on a tangent, but I do think that it is the encroaching threat of AI and automation. No one is immune, for sure. Mm-hmm.
And so, what are your thoughts on how we can start injecting creativity into education, into training, into, you know, the thought processes of young people? There's so much emphasis on bringing STEM education to schools, which is incredibly valuable, but it seems like, you know, every year arts education continues to be under fire, but that may be just as important or should be managed concomitant with STEM education.
Well, I think this really interesting thing has happened in culture where we have, centuries ago, although I mean, in the Renaissance this wasn't the case, but since then we have decided that math, science, and technology is one path, and creativity and humanities are another path. As if these things aren't completely connected to each other and intertwined in our human experience. And I think we've done ourselves a real disservice to create smart thinkers who are not creative and to allow creative thinkers who don't have to be smart. I think our education system has really done itself a disservice by creating a divide between those things, because we are learning now that, or we are relearning that our science and technology focus must include creative thinking, that it's that thinking outside the box that pushes us ahead as a culture. In the first Obama term, I was appointed to the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, and we did a groundbreaking study on the state of arts education in this country. We studied schools all over the country on the role that arts and education plays in those schools and how it can work to improve a school, or the erasure of arts education, how it can cause a school's decline. The report was co-authored by the Department of Education, and we presented it to the White House with Arne Duncan. In the second term, we created a program called Turnaround Arts. And the purpose of Turnaround Arts was to go into our most challenged schools, the schools that were most in need of turnaround, and implement integrative arts education into those schools. Not with the hope of creating future Kerry Washingtons. God forbid we don't need any more Kerry Washingtons. But we wanted to help those schools realize that they could empower and embolden creative thinkers in the future by having arts education, not to learn art, but to learn how to think outside the box, to learn to think for oneself. And that program started out in 5 schools. We're now in over 50 schools all over the country. We've moved the program out of the White House, as you may have imagined, and into the Kennedy Center so that it has survived. And we are continuing to partner with schools all over the country and help those schools. What we've learned is that arts education is actually the key that unlocks a lot of schools' issues. So if you're trying to increase parental involvement, guess what? When there are concerts and plays and art exhibits in the hallways, parents show up. When you're trying to get kids to keep showing up, when you want attendance to improve, arts education allows for greater attendance, higher scores on math and science testing, higher scores in the humanities, of course. We've really learned that so many behavioral issues go down in schools when there's more integrative arts education, and all of the testing goes up. So it really is, for me, that acknowledgement that teaching kids to be creative thinkers makes them more excited to be there, makes them more excited about learning, and makes them better learners it's valuable information that we have to hold on to as a society, because we will not be able to compete as an industrialized country if we refuse to give our kids the tools to think creatively. We will lose our workforce, and we will lose the ability to be productive in this world if we simply know how to paint by number and don't know how to create our own imagery and ideas.
There's a pretty robust conversation going on right now in the arts community, but also in, frankly, all of business and institutions about women in power.
Yeah.
You were very active in the Time's Up movement. You were one of the founding signatories of that organization, and you've been outspoken on the topic. You starred as Anita Hill in Confirmation, and 20 years on, is it frustrating to you as an artist, as an activist, as a business person, that we seem to be having the same conversation about women in power over and over again?
Yes and no. Yes, it's frustrating to me that so many people still don't get it. But no, it's exciting to me that the conversation is evolving and that we're figuring out systemic ways to make change. I think the idea that for us, part of the power in the Time's Up movement was that women are often in Hollywood, there's only one girl, often, unless it's a chick flick with 6 of us, but usually there's one woman, and you might be the only woman on set outside of the hair and makeup trailer. And part of what happened when we all came together in the birth of the Time's Up movement was that we were no longer siphoned in our individual worlds, being told like, oh, that actress is difficult, and that girl, you don't want to work with her, she's crazy, which is of course the myth we were being told. When we all came into the room and started to share our stories and share our experience and agree to join forces together and be in truth and power together, we realized how strong we can be as a community. And we realized that that if we join forces and unite, there is a collective strength that can create real change. And that's what we're doing day to day, whether it's the Legal Defense Fund, whether it's implementing change with the studios, implementing change with hiring practices. And really, Time's Up is not about empowering the entertainment industry. It's really about protecting safety across all industries. The Time's Up tech movement is, to me, one of the strongest arms of the movement right now. And you should get involved if you're not. I say that to men and women. So I think it is frustrating that we're still having some of the same conversations, but I think we're having them in different ways, and I think we're having them in different numbers and with greater visibility, and I do think change is happening.
You've had an opportunity to work and partner with some of the most powerful women in the world of business, full stop. I'd love to do a quick speed round and ask you what you've learned about power from a couple of these terrific women. Shonda Rhimes. What does Shonda tell you about power?
Everything. I think, in Shonda land, I have learned the magic of what it could be to work in a matriarchy. There was this awful, just heartbreaking article in the Times yesterday or today about all the research around the impact of women not receiving their needs during pregnancy, the resulting amounts of miscarriages, stillbirth. And for me to work in a situation where I know, like, you guys, I told my boss that I was pregnant, and she literally started jumping up and down with joy. Her first response was not like, oh, what's gonna happen with the show, or how are we gonna get everybody paid, or how much time off is she gonna want? She was happy for me first, and second was like, okay, how do we take care of you and take care of the show? And we did that through 2 pregnancies. And it didn't impact our 7 seasons. It did impact our 7 seasons, but it didn't derail us. It didn't, it was a very powerful experience to work in a matriarchy.
Reese Witherspoon.
Oh my gosh. Reese is fearless. Fearless. And also fearlessly curious. She, to me, like, she is somebody who is always willing to step into the fight and always willing to be told where her own life experience may have blinded her up until now, right? Like, she has taken to the idea of white privilege and being willing to look at her own white privilege and how it impacts her role in the movement as a feminist with such courage and badassery that it's really inspiring. And she's a fantastic collaborator and partner.
Anita Hill, she was involved in Confirmation.
She was.
What did you learn from her?
Anita Hill taught me what fearlessness really is. Anita Hill taught me, to me, what Anita did was she gave up her anonymity for the sake of our democracy. And that personal cost is very hard for most of us to imagine. There's some of it I identify with, being in the public eye, but not in the same way. So for me, I think she really taught me what sacrifice looks like and how to maintain your dignity in the face of absolute absurdity.
And finally, your mother. What did your mother teach you about power?
Whew. What did my mother teach me about power? I think, my mom got her doctorate around the same time that I graduated from kindergarten, so we both had our caps and gowns. And I think a lot about what it was. She got her doctorate at UMass Amherst, and she used to travel on the train up to Boston.
You grew up here in New York?
Yes, with a 4-year-old to work on her doctorate. So I think at times when I feel overwhelmed, I think a lot about my mother's ability to persevere and to go outside of the limitations that society had put on her. She was the first of her brothers and sisters to have a college degree, postgraduate degree. She really looked society's expectations in the eye and gave it the finger. And she carved out a path for herself where she was somehow a wife and a mother and an esteemed professor. And I often think, she taught me what showing up looks like. Maybe that's the right way to put it. Like, my mother says she's terrified to speak in crowds. She doesn't like public speaking. She's terrified. But I sat in her classroom as a 5-year-old, as a 6-year-old, as a 7-year-old. I sat and watched her in lecture halls full of hundreds of students teaching education courses. And so what that taught me was that that courage is not about the lack of fear, that courage is about feeling the fear and showing up anyway. And I think she taught me that by example.
Well, I think Kerry has shown us what showing up looks like in an amazing way. Thank you so much, Kerry, for being here.
Thank you.